Hi there. Today we'll be continuing our series on Delphi and SQL. For the sample data, I'll be using questions from the 2010 September Free State prelim exam. You will find the data on the web page, and if you download it and extract it into your folders, then you can find here question 1 DPR. If you open question 1, that will open the project file associated with this particular project. You'll see this project has several source files. One data module, which contains the database controls. We have a ADO connect to connect to the database itself. Then the alien table control, alien query, where we'll be using SQL, and the alien source data source. On the other side of this form, local table, direct database access, local query, or an ADO query where we will be using with SQL, and the data source for this particular table. Even without reading the questions, we're going to be asked to do some things using Delphi direct programming and some things using SQL. Right, let's have a look at what our questions say. Right, the first one, for the first two buttons, you need to display the appropriate data of each table on separate forms. Show all the fields in each table in a DB grid component with a navigator component to navigate through the records. You can do this in SQL. It's just a basic SQL select showing everything. But this is where those DB direct controls come in. We'll connect those quickly. The main U form over here, that is our main form. So we have view data locals, and you will see that this particular one is working with FLD show. So the source file that we're going to be typing this answer in or using with this particular question is FLD, which seems to be here, VLD. Okay, there we are, TFLD and FLD. We're using the Delphi direct access control, so this question doesn't actually ask us to do much at all. The first things we're going to have to do is just check in the data module. We want to check in the data module that the table is connected to the database. There it is, the Q1 connect is connected. We also want to check that the table is connected to an appropriate table itself. There it is, CD aliens, and that it is active. Right, it's active. While we're at it, let's just check the local table as well. Local table, that one is already active. Alien source is the data source. It is connected to alien table. Local source is for the local table, and it is already connected to the local table. Check the database itself. It is connected. Back to VLD. We need to connect these controls to the appropriate data source. So, for data source, and in the drop-down box you'll see alien source. This says view local population, so I'm going to connect to the local one. That was difficult. Let's try this for the navigator as well. We're going to connect that to the same local source, and this is now, because this is all they ask of us, a fully functioning form. Let's have a look at the next one. We have to connect both the first two buttons. So we're going along to the second button in main U again. Second button goes to aliens table. This is going to be FAD. which we assume just on VLD. I'm assuming that's this one. Let's just check code. FAD is over there. All right, there we have him. Similar idea. We are going to make sure that this particular DB grid is connected to the correct data source. Remember, we've already checked in the data module to make sure that the table is active. Data source, this is now from the alien source. Form, alien source, and there we are. Was there anything else? No. Okay, let's see if we work. View locals, view aliens. For question 2, we're going to be required to make a query. This means we're going to use one of the ADO query components. We're going to use a wildcard with like on any text field. I want a DB grid, ComboBox, and a search button on the form. All right, let's have a look at what we have. We're going back to menu. Let's see where that particular button takes us. It takes us to this particular one. We're going to be looking at LD query. So I'm assuming that's what QLD refers to. And on this one, we are given a combo box with several values which relate to the fields in the database. An edit box where we are going to type the value to search for, and a search button. So first up, our search button is where the code is going to be. I want this DB grid to display information from the aliens query. I could link the existing data source. Then I would have to add code elsewhere to swap backwards and forwards between data sources if I was wanting to work with the first button. So instead, I'm going to add a second data source at this particular point. Go. Our data source. Let's connect that to the the local query, because we're busy with the locals table, and then we connect our DB grid to this second data source. There we go, data source 1. It would be nice to give it a name. Oh, nothing appears at the moment because our alien query is not active. If you have a look at that query in the data module, there we go, QDM, get local query, you will see it has an SQL property. This already has some values typed in. Select everything from census data locals. That means if I was to make this active, it should already load into memory the full contents of that table. It is giving me an error though, so let's have a look quickly at the database and see just what is going on there. In the database, I can see immediately that my table's name is CD locals. So the source that is provided for me in this case has an error. The name of the table is incorrect. And this one here should be CD aliens. While we're at it, let's just check both of them. All right. So let's look at the SQL. There it is. That should be CD locals. CD locals. Make this active, no error this time. And it also means that in QLD, suddenly I have data. While we're at it, let's fix the alien query because it probably has the same mistake. Here we are, the SQL property. And yes, indeed it does. census data aliens, we're going to change that to CD8. Right, our code is going to end up in the search button. Everything executes as soon as we press search, so this is where we are going to be programming. Our question requires query. We're going to be selecting things again with a like search. That means a where clause. So this means our SQL is going to look something like this. We're going to have select. Do they say what columns we need? No, columns are not specified. The only thing that's specified is that we're going to be using a wildcard in a search, which means we're going to have a where clause. So select asterisk. This represents all the columns from cd local where. At this point, I don't know which column the information is going to be coming from. I'm just going to type column for the moment. We will fill that in shortly. Like, and I don't know where my information is, what I'm searching for yet. So I'm just going to fill in a random value just so that I can see what my SQL looks like. I'm selecting everything from CD local where some other column is going to be like some other text. Let's see where that comes from. In the design, this combo box refers to the column that's going to be used. So I can use this in my SQL. The one little bit to remember though is now we are referring to a Delphi control. I cannot pass a Delphi control or the value from a Delphi control directly in the SQL. I need to construct this SQL statement, and it is now going to include something from the combo box. Combo box. Let's just check what that name was. This thing is labeled combo box 1 dot text. And I will be adding this to a value from the edit box. Let's check what its name is. Edit box is named edit1. All right. I obviously can't pass it like this. This, as it stands, is one long string, and Access is going to be looking for a column named ComboBox1.text. We need to put this in inverted commas to separate out the SQL string portions from where we reference values from Delphi's controls. Let's build this statement in Delphi now. The query's name, is alien query. So that's what we're going to use. And it's on the data module. The data module's name is DM. Always deactivate your query before you start to make sure that there isn't any risk of trying to modify live data. The other thing we have to do is make sure we clear any SQL that may be lying around in that SQL property. Access is pretty good about making sure that you cannot send two SQL statements in one piece of code. It's one of the protections against SQL injection. But it's also just a good policy. Clear your SQL statement before you start. That way you make sure that you are starting with a clean sheet. And now we begin. VM local query .sql.add. You can, of course, also use the SQL text property, say text equals, and then place all your SQL in between those inverted commas. But that's going to lead to a very long line, and especially if the SQL gets complicated. I prefer to keep things separated line by line to make life easier for me to read. Remember, you're always programming for at least two entities. Computer that has to interpret the code, and also for yourself as the person that has to read this code, understand it, and maintain it later. I find it easier if I can keep each line of the SQL. Yes, they can all be on one line, and it isn't a line in the technical sense, but each part of the SQL statement distinct. It makes it easier for me to find and track down errors if they occur later. Local. And now the meat and bones of this query, the where clause. All right. As things stand, this section where starting with select everything from CD local, where, that is SQL. This little section is Delphi and must actually lie outside this particular string. So we are going to end that string there. Like over here is part of the SQL statement. I need to put this inside inverted commas to indicate that this is part of that string. Make sure there's a little space over there. Otherwise, this little word like will be concatenated with value from the ComboBox, and you're going to end up with something that says state local like, and that might be hard for both Access and Delphi to deal with. Right, and here we're taking a value from edit1.text. This end there is the end of our SQL statement. Remember, an SQL statement also ends with a semicolon, just like Delphi. That does mean that you're going to end up with 2 extra semicolons lying around. All right, last little thing. Edit1.text over here is going to be a string in Microsoft Access. Yes, I know this whole amount that is being sent along is a string, but Access doesn't know it. Access just receives this big body of text. So we have to tell Microsoft Access that the value over here is also a string. To do that, we need to put it inside quotation marks. Easier than messing around with multiple quotation marks, one inside the other, which can be hard to read. Remember those two entities we were programming for a moment ago? Delphi provides a nice little function, quoted string. Quoted string will put the inverted commas around edit1.text, and that makes it clear to you that the stuff, in this particular instance nicely highlighted in blue, is the text that is being sent to Microsoft Access. This is the first value that I'm including. This is the second value, and because it is inside that function, it will be quoted correctly. Last thing we have to do, we have to make this active. Otherwise, it will not update the values in that DB grid, and the SQL will not be executed. So, vm.local query equals true. And let's see what happens. Go. And let's call this Baldwin. Search. Oopsie. Something happened. Cannot find the input or table's CD local. Have a check. CD locals. Never be afraid of errors. Remember, the whole time you have Microsoft Access and Delphi, which are communicating with each other. You're giving an instruction to Delphi, and Delphi is then sending that instruction to Microsoft Access, and your results are coming back from Microsoft Access. Read your error messages, and you'll be able to find out that in this particular instance, I spelled the table name incorrectly. Let's start over. Baldwin and search. And there we are. I don't know what the values mean, but Baldwin's the only one we've got. And on to question number 3. For the query alien data button, you only need to have 2 non-user entered query buttons. So there's going to be no data coming from any user entered field. They're going to be just fairly easy. Use a button to retrieve all the records where there are more than 300 aliens in these particular dates. Okay, this database only has those 4 columns, 1, 2, 3, 4. There they are, 1, 2, 3, 4. And in the second one, use a button to retrieve only state and country, where there are less than 100 aliens in those 2 columns. All right, let's see what we can do. So, I'm looking for main. We're going to query alien data. This particular one is going to be opening AD query. So let's query AD over here. And you'll see we've got query 1 and query 2 for these 2 different buttons. Again, we're going to have a DB grid, which will be connecting to a data source. I could connect to this particular alien source on the data module, but then I would have to also reconnect alien source to alien query, moving it away from alien table. So I'm going to take a little bit of a shortcut and put a data source on this form. That one we will connect to alien query. The DB grid we can now connect to data source we've just created, and we can give it an appropriate name. And there we are. Query 1. This is also a select statement. Select, say we are to select all values from CD aliens. We don't want to make the same spelling mistake twice. CD aliens, where this is where phrasing becomes very important. Notice the question says where there are more than 300 aliens in 1910, 1920, 1930, and 1940. This can be a little bit ambiguous. I'm going to interpret it very literally. There are more than 300 aliens in 1910 and more than 300 aliens in 1920 and more than 300 aliens in 1930 and more than 300 aliens in 1940. It's going to have to be true for all 4. So we're going to have a 1920 bigger than 300 and a 1940 What are those column names again? We've got 1910, 1920, 1930, and 1940. 1910 and 1920 bigger than 300, and 1930 bigger than, and 1940. Access should be able to handle this without any trouble. If this was an if statement, I would have to add parentheses around the different Boolean statements, Boolean expressions, to make sure that these would be interpreted correctly. On the principle that I'm programming not just for Microsoft Access in this instance, but also for myself to make it easier for me to read, I'm adding parentheses to make it clear what each part of the expression refers to. So that is our first SQL statement. Let's add the Delphi wrapper around that again. We're going to be working again with something that's on the data module. We're going to be working with alien query this time. And like always, we start off by deactivating control. Clear any code that might be lying around in the SQL statement. Oh, come on. And build our SQL statement. Aliens. Last line. Last step, make this active again. Let's test. We're busy with query alien data, query 1, and there we go. These values, you'll notice, have more than 300 for all 4 columns. Same idea for query 2. So much the same idea that we're going to start with this little shortcut. Never take longer than you actually need to. This particular query asks us to show only the state and county where there are less than 180 aliens in 1920 and in 1940. Again, I'm going to interpret this literally because of the possible ambiguity, whether it is 1920 and 1940 combined or in each individual column. I'm going to interpret this literally, whether there are 100 aliens in 1920 and 100 less than 100 aliens in 1940. Again, that was an or, this would be a very different statement. So our SQL is going to look a little bit like this. Select, we want just 2 columns this time. We want the column for state and the columns for county, which are named county alien and state alien. Spelling, as always, is important. County The question does not show, or does not say that you should actually show the values. It says retrieve only state and county. So we are only going to show those two columns. Then this is going to be CD aliens and our where clause. We're going to be using a 1920 is less than 100 and a 1940 less than 100. Check that. 1920 and 1940. SQL will handle that, and without any parentheses, fine. I'm going to add the brackets in really for my own benefit to make it easier for me to see that this is the first Boolean expression and that is the second Boolean expression. All right, now we can cut and paste. This little section replaces that line. This little section replaces this line. From CD aliens stays the same. Ready to, and there we have it. This time there are a few more. And I think that brings us to question 4. Modify local data. Allow to enter a specific field and value to delete that record from the table. The make a backup of your database is always a good principle when you're starting to practice modifying table data. Remember that as soon as something is removed using one of these SQL instructions, it is gone. This is a permanent deletion. So use 2 edit boxes to enter the text field and delete a specific record. Let's have a look at what we need to do. This will be this last modify local data button. We are going to be working with modloc. Modloc, I'm assuming, will be, there we go, in MLD. And they've given us, again, county local, this ComboBox business, and they've given us an edit box. That doesn't match exactly with what we were told we'd be given. Here we get told we're going to have 2 edit boxes, but we have a ComboBox instead. That's not a huge problem. I'll work with the ComboBox. You would use an edit box in exactly the same way. ComboBox 1.text or edit 1.text. You're both going to be referring to a text property to contain the value. The ComboBox just means you don't have to retype the value. It's already provided for you. So, time for SQL. This is going to execute as soon as you press the delete button. Okay, let's begin. This is going to be an SQL delete. Delete from, check which table we're deleting from. Local data. That table name is CD locals. When you're working with delete statements, your where clause is particularly important. A mistake here can lead to all the data in the table being deleted at worst, and just some of the incorrect records at best. That's one reason why your instructions are make a backup first before we carry on. Copy the data. That way you can very easily undo any mistakes you made. But that's the only way you can undo a mistake that you've made here. Just as with the previous question where we were working with combo boxes, I'm going to be taking something from a column as yet unspecified, and we'll be displaying a result. Going to be working with text fields to enter the value. So, like some more other value. Column is going to come from Delphi. Value is going to come from Delphi. This is going to take a value from this particular component. It's also named ComboBox 1, just as in the previous question. Value comes from this edit box, which is named edit1. And in both instances, we are working with the text property. Right. Now we need to add that Delphi wrapper around the SQL again. We are working with local query this time because we are working with the local database. It doesn't absolutely matter. Technically, you only need the one query, and because you are changing the SQL statement and you specify the table that you're working with in that statement, we only need the one ADO query. But the question gives us two, so let's use the local query for it. Deactivate it. Clear any remaining SQL that may be hanging around and looking pretty, not doing anything. And now we add our SQL statements into the Delphi wrapper. Just as in the previous example, that plus indicates the end of the SQL portion. There's the first little section of SQL. This is SQL, and this value over here is a Delphi value. So it is outside the string that we are sending to Access. We're going to send value that's contained in ComboBox1.text. Like is part of the SQL statement. Put it inside the string, and we have edit1.text again. We are referring to a text value, so just as with the previous example, quoted string, and there I have a statement that is going to delete from CD locals anything where a particular column matches a particular value that I type in. There's a difference between this one and the SQL select statements that we've used up to this point. Delete statements do not return a cursor in that gives you access to the data. They modify the data and in no way influence the DB grid afterwards. So we are going to have to execute this in a slightly different way. dm.localQuery.exec SQL. That would execute the statement. But there's an extra part to this question. They want you to check whether a record is found or not. We need to know whether something was deleted. Exec SQL also returns a value. So let me store this for a little moment. Very simple little value. All it does is it returns the number of records that were influenced by this statement. But we can use this to determine whether anything actually happened here. If my little value is bigger than 0, then I know some values were affected. And the string that we're supposed to return is record deleted. Right now, my little variable SQL result actually contains the number of records that were deleted if this little where clause managed to match more than one record. Distinct possibility that it would. Else not bigger than 0, then we return record not found. There we go. Try and execute that one. We're going to check now, and remember we had that thing Baldwin that returned 2 values. Let's try and delete that. Record deleted. Gone. All right, let's see if we get any more. Record not found. Sorry, Baldwin. You're not in the building anymore. Last question. For the modify alien data, update all the records where the value in 1910 is less than 200. This portion means we're going to have a where clause in our update statement. Update 1920 to 300, 1930 to 400, and 1940 to 500. Use a message method to display the result alien data updated. All right, seeing as nothing complicated is expected and specified, we can use show message again for that. Main menu, we're working with mod alien, which is the last one left. We assume is add. And we're going to work with this update button. So our SQL will look a little bit like this. Update CD aliens. We're going to be setting A1920 equal to 300, A1930 equal to 400, A1940, those are the names of the columns, is equal to 500. And our where clause, where A1910 is less than 200. And so for our last Delphi wrapper, dm.alienQuery.active is false. dm.alienQuery again, .sql.clear, dm.alienQuery.add, we're going to be adding 3 lines of this. This bit goes there, that bit goes there, and this bit goes there. As with the last bit, an update query does not modify the row pointers, which will allow us to update a DB grid. We're going to have to call this with exec SQL. It is. And we're asked, as the final part of the question, show alien data updated. But there's no check to see how many records were affected. So we can just say, show message. Alien data updated. And let's see what happens. What happens is you leave out that you're working with the SQL property. And there we go. Modify alien data, call update, alien data updated.